Hey, good morning there. Welcome to our NetSuite Simplified webinar series, where we take one NetSuite topic each month and we break it down and we simplify it for you guys. So this month, all that we are talking about is warehouse efficiency. So we're going to take a lot of the different pieces within warehouse efficiency, and warehousing in general, right? There's a lot of the physical aspects of your warehouse, and there's a lot of the system side, right? How your system is a tool to help move along your warehouse and the processes. So we're gonna take a bunch of those today, and we're gonna talk about the different options that you have within NetSuite, and also the options that you see out there with third parties. So a lot of great topics to cover today. One thing that I will note is that the GoToWebinar that we use for these webinars has a questions feature. So as we go through this, if something pops in your mind, or if you join this for a certain reason to kind of get a question answered, definitely log it, and we're gonna have a Q&A that we come back to at the end, okay? So before we jump into introductions, I'm gonna talk quickly about what we reviewed last month. And so what we talked about last month, in case you missed it, was all about profitable e-commerce. And we had Tadpole on the call with us. Jake Cook joined us, and he went through a lot of the different pieces about how we can gain profitable e-commerce. And if you're sitting on this call and you're like, well, this doesn't apply to me, there might be someone in your team, whether it's a marketing individual or an e-com specialist that's on your team, that might want to get a better view as to how do I take my SuiteCommerce or my Shopify platform and NetSuite, all that data, the Google Analytics, how do I bring that all together, get some great analytics, and start to drive some of that information into becoming more profitable, right? Managing your inventory, getting rid of old inventory, right? How do you do those things? And marketing is often the tool. So a really great webinar. It's recorded. And if you want that recording, reach out to us at NetSuite Simplified at goVirtualOffice.com. And you'll hear that email mentioned a couple of times. You guys can reach out to us in any way, shape, or form. But if you want this recording from last month, reach out to us through that email. So let's go into some introductions. For those of you that have been on these webinars in the past, I should be a familiar face. I'm Mark Miller, the Professional Services Manager at goVirtualOffice. And a little bit about my background: I started in supply chain and manufacturing consulting, evolved into NetSuite consulting, and have done enterprise to small business projects, implementations, worked with a number of different industries and modules within the environment. So I've got a lot of background, but today isn't really about me. It's mostly about the two experts that we've got on the call, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Drake, Senior Business Consultant here at GVO. I've been with the company for approximately 5 years. Prior to starting at GVO, my background was in distribution and also within manufacturing. So manufacturing was both large and small, flow manufacturing, and then also just job shop. So I'll be leading you through some of this presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to get some nuggets out of this that you'll be able to at least consider as you guys look at your own warehouse.
Hey everyone, my name is Torm Hussett. I've been with goVirtualOffice for just over 2 years. Prior to GVO, I was Salesforce administrator, worked a lot with the sales and CRM side, but upon coming to GVO, I now work with e-commerce, warehouse management more specifically, and just excited to meet you all virtually here and show you some nice tips and tricks in NetSuite.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks, guys. So I'm going to pass it back to them, but first I've got a couple, 2 slides to get through here, and I just want to start with talking about GVO. That's the only 2 topics for the slides. So quick things about goVirtualOffice for those that either haven't worked with us yet or are interested and are kind of joining the webinar for the first time. We are a NetSuite provider, a NetSuite solution provider. We are one of the top ones, and I would say that because we've been a 5-star partner for several years. We were partner of the year in 2019, really adopting the Suite Success model to get companies up and running in NetSuite as soon as possible using some great methodology. We also have done tons of different projects. So you'll see there in the listed 100+ implementations, 700+ projects. we're supporting a ton of users, and we've got a lot of our team certified. So there's a lot of depth in terms of industry knowledge and NetSuite expertise. The one thing that I would say that differentiates us even more, though, is that we're mostly a Midwest company, and you'll kind of get a taste for that in this webinar. We are very professional, but at the same time, we do enjoy ourselves too. We work with humans day in, day out, and we know, especially during this COVID time, it's hard to get that connection, and we understand that. So there's a lot about working with us that's just a benefit in general. All right, so that's a little bit about GVO, and in terms of the structure and how we work with our clients and different businesses, this is a really powerful piece, and that's why I just want to cover it for another minute or so. The structure is that we have a client success team, so every single client gets a lot of backing, and the first stage of that is to have a senior business consultant that's assigned to them, and that senior business consultant works with their strategy and their business objectives to understand how we can use NetSuite as a tool to enable those strategies. And so the senior business consultants that we have, like Jamie, have decades of industry experience, a lot of NetSuite experience, so very valuable person to have on your side. And then they're paired with execution teams. So we've got an execution team that's assigned to each one of our clients. So you get continuity, working with the same individuals day in and day out, and they're led by a senior application consultant with a great NetSuite knowledge, right? Decades of NetSuite knowledge in the detail, and they lead a team of application consultants to support them. And so they're all in how to configure your NetSuite environment, how to update, add modules, all that kind of good stuff. And then they're also supported by our data and development team. So we've got developers to help automate those maybe manual tasks that you spend week over week, spending a little bit too many hours on, and you wish there was just a way to automate the rules that you do. Well, that's what our development team is there for, and our data team is there to help convert any historical data or any transitions of data that you have. So a lot of support within our team, but now I'm going to transfer back to Jamie, and he will be able to talk about what we're going to cover today.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so really the intent of this call is we want to try to provide you with a vision of what you can do to help with your warehouse. So there are a lot of different areas to consider when going through this, and my goal is to just give you some call outs. So as you're thinking about things, what are some of the gotchas that I need to consider, and what should I plan for? So that's really the intent, is we're going to try to show you a bunch of different elements, so as you're planning, you'll know why. When people reach out to us, they usually do so for two reasons. The first one is, first and foremost, they just want to be more efficient. How can I improve on the time that it takes for me to get an order, process it through my warehouse, and get an invoice out to the client? That's really one of the key goals. Secondly, it's also customer experience. Usually where this comes into play the most is if you're kind of the mid-market company and you've managed to secure some nice contracts with either a regional player or maybe a national corporation. There are going to be some expectations that they have of how your warehouse delivers information to them and delivers product to them that you need to abide by. So we're going to try to make sure that you're aware of what some of those could be. Either A, you're experiencing it already, or you're interested in pursuing that avenue and you need to be aware of what rules are going to be applied to you. And then we're going to also talk through how does this get done. First and foremost, I advocate that you have a strong partner that you're able to have ideas, run them by, and make sure that it makes the most sense for your company. GVO, we're here to be an advocate for you. And so my intent is not just to sell more software, sell more services. I want you to be successful, and I want your company to grow. So first and foremost, that's my concern. And whether we attack that using NetSuite, whether we do that through third-party applications that are suited for what your desired outcome is, or whether we need to have some custom development to automate things where there is a gap between what NetSuite can deliver, what the third party delivers, and what you either want to do or what your client is telling you you need to do. So that is what we're going to cover today. All right, so the first group of topics that I wanted to discuss are master record attributes. So this is an area where we're going to go through a lot of cool functionality and things to consider, but if you don't have some of these building blocks in place, you're not going to get the desired outcome. So you need to make sure that we start with this part and we grow from here. All right, so the first one that I just want to make sure I get out in front of everyone is as it relates to cycle counting. So cycle counting is really, it's very straightforward. I mean, it's a procedure. I want to be counting my inventory at a regular scheduled time to make sure that it's accurate. You know, the first step is going through your item records, defining what are your A items, what are your B items, what are your C items. You know, A's are usually your top 20% in terms of sales. You know, C's are your bottom 20% of sales. And then B is essentially everything in between. When you're setting up that information on your item records, you need to consider, you know, how many days in between each one of those counts do you want to do. So for example, your A's, depending on the value and how frequently they turn, you may want to be counting those every 2 weeks, whereas the C's, you know, they move so slowly. It's like if I hit them once a quarter, that's probably perfectly fine. And so that is one thing that you need to do. And the reason that inventory, you know, cycle counting is so important is that everyone relies on the information that's provided there. So, you know, customer service, if you have an order coming in, or do I have items on hand that I can actually commit to an order? Purchasing needs that to make sure that they're replenishing stock or ordering raw materials when you need them. And then finally, manufacturing relies on the accuracy of that information because they need to understand when do I actually need to start production on this and not have people, you know, standing around looking and waiting for items to come in to actually start making product. So the end goal is that you're going to get to the point where you have a record like you see on your screen right now, the inventory count, where you're actually verifying that out. All right, next couple slides that we have relate to demand planning. So I'm going to give a little bit of a plug here. Next month, our topic that we're going to be covering is demand planning. So my colleague Renee will be going into this in more in depth. So right now, you can basically just consider this a teaser. So demand planning is something that people bring up to us a lot. I mean, right now we're living in a very uncertain time. There's a lot of fluctuation in how things are handled. So this people view as a way to make that happen. So first step in this process is I have a couple of screenshots here for you to see, but you're going to need to establish what your preferences are on the item record. So for example, if you're looking at the screenshot, you may need to decide what kind of supply type is this? Is this something I'm making? Is it something that I'm buying? How am I going to handle that? Another one might be safety stock level. You know, how many of these do I want to make sure that I have on hand at any given time to handle any surge or fluctuation? So if it's an item that, you know, every day it might have five that go out the door, but then you know that this customer every 2 to 3 weeks they hit me up for 200. You want to be able to handle those ebbs and flows. So that's a way of doing so. You know, using these preferences in conjunction with your transactional history is going to be able to deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. The exception to think about here, though, is if you are new to NetSuite and you don't have either good forecasts or you don't have a long history of transactional information, just account for the fact that if you come to your partner and you say, I want to do demand planning, but you don't have those elements in there, they may ask you to either wait and consider this as a fast follower, or, you know, B, there's ways of getting around bringing in that information. It just takes a little bit of time, so you need to make sure that you're planning accordingly. So once you have your demand plan once you have those preferences set up on the item records, then you'll move into the actual deliverables. So the first outcome that you would have in NetSuite is you're going to generate your demand plan. So your demand plan is basically looking at, okay, the preference that you have on your item records, and it's also looking at your either A, your forecasted sales, so quotes, or B, it's looking at your past transactional history. And what it's doing is saying, okay, based on the information that you're providing me, this is what I feel your demand will be over the next period of time. Within NetSuite, you have different ways that you can display that. You can look at it by month. You can look at it by week. There are a lot of options. One call out that I have is as you're transitioning to using demand planning, you'll notice on the screenshot, there's a field over there where it says, okay, look out how many months. And you may want to start off with a very small window, you know, go through, get the data in, test it out, make sure that it's delivering the outcomes that you do before you really set that horizon out further and really allow it to automate. It's one of those things where there's a lot of things that go into planning. You want to make sure that it's behaving as you'd like it to. So this demand plan is the first element that NetSuite would provide to you. The second element that you see in front of you now is called the supply plan. So now that you know how many you're selling, this is how many you need to actually either purchase or make. And within NetSuite, depending on your item preferences again, it's going to say you need to run this work order on this day for this quantity, or it may say you need to purchase this item of this quantity on this date. So it's just a combination of those two elements coming together. All right. Lastly, the other thing to consider is more likely than not, you're probably having items that you are sourcing from abroad, either items that you're selling or items that you may use in conjunction with your own manufacturing process. So landed cost is something that's very simple, and I'm always a big advocate for it because it really trues up your costs. So what landed cost does is basically you go into NetSuite, you set up items that are mapped to specific GL accounts. So for example, you see on the screenshot here, you may have freight, you might have import fees. And what you're doing is just mapping it to that GL account. And then you also then go through on your item records again, and you'll say, these are the items that I want to apply landed cost to. And then what happens in NetSuite is then you go in, you issue your PO, you do your item receipt. And at the time of item receipt, you'll see on the screenshot here, you have landed cost that you apply to that. So usually what you have is you have a freight bill in hand from your freight forwarder, and the user goes in and says, okay, for this receipt, these are the costs that are associated with it. And then you determine how do you want to spread that value out amongst your items. So the second screenshot that you see on the bottom there shows how that's distributed. And so then what happens then is your inventory valuation is true. Now, the reason that I like landed cost so much is that when I'm working with clients, usually where this comes up the most is when they're doing pricing on new items. So for example, I'm setting up a new item, and usually how this demonstrates itself is the person that's doing the pricing is like, you know what, I always mark this up by 10% because I know that's enough to cover my, SG&A. And that's fine, but it's not really tied out as much as I would recommend. So by doing landed costs and knowing the direct cost associated with a specific item, your accuracy improves and you don't have to have that fudge factor anymore. Just as a call out though, this will also call out some of those bad habits and people that are, maybe they have expediting that they're adding on to an order because the salesperson didn't challenge their customer to get them the information that they need to make sure that everything, transpires as they want. So they're putting a freight bill for $500 because it was a rush order on your vendor's side. And in the past, all those costs kind of went into the ether and it just went against the general SG&A account. Well, now that's applied directly to account. So if your sales reps are paid, their commission is partly based on gross margin, they're going to see their margins decrease, and that's going to be a conversation that you'll end up having to have. So again, landed cost is something that I really like it because it improves the accuracy of your inventory valuation. All right, another one to consider as it relates to setting up your master records are the use of bins. Given my background, there's just a couple of considerations here that I want to make sure that you're thinking about, either A, if you're actively using bins, or B, if you think that you're going to be moving towards them. So the first one is basically just the numbering convention. So I usually try to make sure that when people are setting this up, they are doing so in a way that allows them to grow and expand, and they haven't painted themselves into a corner with a numbering convention. So what I normally try to advise is try to set up something with like an aisle, bin, and a level combination. So something like 3-digit, 3-digit, 2-digit. In most cases, that's going to cover all of your needs and you should be perfectly fine. So once you have your bins defined, then the other thing that I would also advise is consider the hardware that you're going to be using to scan those items. You need to think about, okay, am I scanning my bin locations from the floor level, or do I have an order picker where I'm going to be right next to that barcode? And the reason being is that hardware is going to have a specification that it'll say, oh, it can scan 15 feet up. You don't have to worry about it. Well, that's all well and good, but test it out. Just because it says that's what the spec is, try to test it out in real world scenarios. The other thing that I would advise is as you're going through and testing out that hardware, really look at the durability of that. In my past, I've had people that try to sell me a lower cost option with the mindset that, it's so cheap that, if it breaks, you don't have to worry about it. It's $200, just buy a new one, attach it, you guys are ready to go. that's fine, but no matter how clean your warehouse is, there's going to be dust that's going to work its way into that hardware. And my personal opinion is that I hate spending the same dollar twice. So just be mindful of that. Make sure that you're vetting things out. Another thing that sounds really odd to consider, but how are you going to be powering those handheld devices? So I've always had a bias to wiring them directly into the units that the person is using to do the order picking. And the reason being is you don't have to worry about battery life. If you have handheld units, the other thing that you're going to have is you're going to have a docking station with more than enough batteries. And another thing that may burn you is just make sure that somebody's assigned to, before you leave for the end of the day and turn off the lights, somebody's looking at that docking station and making sure that all your handheld batteries are in there. Because if not, you're going to show up the next day and you're going to have 3 people staring at you because, well, somebody didn't do their job and I can't pick now because I have no battery power, which is not a good way to start out your morning. All right. And then another consideration is once you have defined the numbering sequence, what my hardware that I'm using, before you go out and invest in actually labeling all of your racking, print out the labels that you have, just mock them up. Laser printer is fine. Put them in the real world scenario, use the combination of both, and just make sure that it's delivering as you expected. Reason being is once you start investing in having, more likely than not, you're going to outsource somebody to print off all these labels for you. Just make sure that you don't spend a couple grand on something that real world doesn't work. All right. So lastly, the other thing to consider, and that's where these 2 images are coming into place here, is there's different ways that you're going to be able to put your barcoding on for your bins on your racking. I highly advise the option on the left, which is essentially it's just a magnetic sticker. And the reason is instead of doing the option that's on the right, which is just kind of like a label pouch, reason being is label pouches over time, they're going to have dust that's going to settle on them. They're going to get brittle. They're going to break. The zip ties that you see on the corners, they're going to fall off. I just don't prefer them. And another fact of life for anybody who's lived in a warehouse is that eventually your staff is going to get a little bit too friendly with the racking. They're probably going to damage it. You're going to have to go out and get a new cross member, new upright, whatever it happens to be. And if it's easy enough for the maintenance guy to just peel off that label, slap it on the new location, win-win. Another benefit with it being this flexible is if you guys decide to expand your warehouse, it's again, pull them off, put them on a new location. It's a lot less headache than having a bag full of zip ties and doing that for hours on end. All right, so Mark was hinting at some of our Midwesternness, and that was being very kind on his part. A lot of this is probably me, so sometimes I like to laugh. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen the show Portlandia, but I'm a big fan. And within Portlandia, there is a store that sells items, and all they do is they slap a bird on things and mark it up and make money. And that just kind of reminds me of usually with the conversation that I hear from people as it relates to barcoding. So if I get on a soapbox, I apologize, but barcoding is nothing more than a different format of text. So just approach it with that mindset. At the very beginning, your team will be able to use them to help expedite their data entry, either directly within NetSuite or through a third-party app that we'll tell you about later. Now, usually where people get a little bit confused is like, well, if I scan a barcode, I want X, Y, and Z to happen. And all of that is very, very, capable of doing with, custom development. So the idea is, though, I scan a barcode and I trigger a process to happen. And if you want to do that, we can. But if you get to that point where you want to automate a process, don't be surprised if I ask you what that process is. And we have to be very specific because as soon as you start automating things with custom development, it does exactly what it says. So if there's any gaps in your process, it could create a bunch of rework really fast, which I'm here to help try to guide you around and minimize the opportunity for that happening.
All right, thanks, Jamie. I'm going to take over here and we're going to talk about warehouse processes. So where can we find efficiencies in your warehouse? Where do we maybe have some common issues or areas that we can focus on to either increase that efficiency or, as we'll see here, actually increase your end customer's user experience in doing business with you? And, part of the warehouse process, it all begins with receiving. So the first thing that I'll want to dive into is receiving in more detail. What we're trying to avoid is that picture on the right? We got a box that's on our loading dock, and nobody knows what's in it. Maybe nobody knows where it came from. Also, it's a hole in it, and it's just kind of sitting there. Really take the opportunity when you go to think about your warehouse to give receiving a deep look. It's really where you take all of your efficiencies and put the train on the track, so to speak. There's a variety of natural options here. We've got the receive order screenshot in the background there. That allows you to receive multiple purchase orders at a single time. That's just a simple way to speed things up. Inbound shipments. So if you have things that are kind of on a boat or on a truck, you can actually use inbound shipments to get a better idea of when you anticipate things will arrive, even before they hit your location. Other examples are temporary bin locations, dock staging locations, quarantine locations, everything COVID right now. Maybe you put things in quarantine for a period of time before you release them to stock. Leveraging these natural NetSuite functionalities are a great way to increase some efficiency and also give that line of sight to management on where are the things that are supposed to be here. Really a critical part of the process, and reach out to your NetSuite partner if you need to talk about some of these natural functionalities available just to help with the receiving alone. The next area of NetSuite that we often work a lot with is picking. NetSuite has two kind of fundamental schools of thought as it relates to picking, whether you pick on an order by order basis, which is referred to as wave picking, or you refer to it as like a SKU by SKU basis, which is batch picking. Wave picking, it offers some advantages, especially if you have expedited shipping. If you have groupings of orders that need to be out the door by 11 a.m., regardless of everything else, you might want to look at wave picking. That'll help you kind of get things out the door more quickly and slate certain orders to be thrown onto the truck. Batch picking differs from an efficiency standpoint, where you have one person making one trip to one bin. Maybe they're picking 10 of the SKUs for 3 different orders, but it's really about how do I pick these SKUs in batches for the orders that need to go out the door. As you go down this path, which one do I pick? How do I pick it? Think a lot about how you manage your orders internally. Are your staff on the floor talking about, I need to go pick 20 SKUs? Or are they talking about, I need to pick this order? That may help you a lot, kind of put you down one avenue here. The prioritized shipping and delivery methods is also really critical. If you have prioritized orders that need to get out the door, then the batch picking may not be the right fit. Wave picking may be a better fit. And then the last thing I'll mention is NetSuite does have a warehouse management, WMS, that can allow you to even schedule out picking. That's going to help you coordinate resources. So if you've got, 2 or 3 people that wear many hats, right? Maybe they have to receive in the day, pick in the afternoon, and item fulfill later. If you use WMS, you can actually help schedule things and get a good feel for, today's a heavy picking day. Maybe we'll have to do some receipts at the end of the day before. There's a lot of ways WMS can help you take a look at how much time is this going to take given what's ahead of us. Next up, we're going to talk about shipping. So this is where we're going to pivot a little bit, away from natural NetSuite into some third-party options. If you're using NetSuite today for your shipping, you may be using a natural FedEx or UPS integration. Both of those are great. You can grab real-time rates, print off labels, and get things out the door. However, as you begin to scale, you may need a more advanced shipping solution, and we've highlighted 2 here, ShipStation and PaceJet. Now, what these 2 offer in terms of an advantage, and it's definitely something to discuss with your NetSuite partner, is these 2 have natural, out-of-the-box integrations with NetSuite. There are tons of third-party shipping solutions and softwares out there on the market. Some of them will say they integrate with NetSuite. Some of them will say it's not a problem. And then at the end of the day, it's actually quite a big problem to get it implemented. So always just, thoroughly vet your third-party shipping solutions. It's a really critical area of your business. Solutions such as these 2, they allow you to do rate shopping much more easily. You can have varying rates. You can see the shipments by carrier graph on the right here, all the different order queues here on the left. I mean, there's some very flashy technology with each varying solution. Just carefully vet them out. Talk to your NetSuite partner about it, their experience. Here at GVO, we've got experience working with both of these in addition to probably a half dozen other solutions out there on the market. So always just think about that. What I'd also ask you to consider, if you're thinking about pivoting to a third-party shipping solution, if you have e-commerce, this is a big decision. Are you going to display your real-time rates to your store? Are you running any web promotions that are going to affect your shipping costs? Do you have any local companies that carry your product and deliver your product, other than the big ones? Some of your local LTL companies, they may not be compatible with the third-party software. So there's a lot of little details here with third-party shipping that are worth some conversation with your NetSuite partner and likely the third party, just to make sure that, as you grow and scale, you have a scalable third-party solution as well. Another instance that you'll find yourself in as you start growing with respect to the warehouse is you might get some warehouse third-party options that start to come into play. NetSuite WMS and RF Smart are the two that I'm going to highlight here. How do I know if I'm going to need this? Basically, the natural picking options that are available to you begin to not be as efficient, or the volume is just such that you're looking for some way to get devices more into hands and creating orders and records out of pocket, so to speak. On the right, with NetSuite WMS, you're literally building that purchase order or receiving that purchase order on a phone or on a tablet. RF Smart, that's where we start talking about scanning software and how do I do things like license plating, where I can take pallets of goods on the floor, give it a license plate, and then I can track it and have different stages of my process scanned into its locations. Really some nice functionality here. The key thing just to know if you're a fit for one of these two is how much picking are we doing, and if we're doing barcoding effectively and we just want to get more kind of on the floor and real-time information with scanning, both of these options here are great options to take it to the next step. Now, to Jamie's point earlier, once you've, internally you might have gotten things more efficient in your warehouse, there's going to be some customer-facing communication concerns or, just kind of hurdles that you may have to accommodate. You land that first strategic customer, they're going to have standard ways of communicating data electronically that you might have to wrestle with. They might have specialized labels that you need to provide. So this next kind of bucket of slides is just some additional softwares or solutions that we found effective for if you're starting to engage in more kind of like enterprise level customers and large strategic customers. The first being EDI. So what is EDI? It's electronic data exchange. The kind of boring book definition is standardized data model for the purposes of communicating data electronically. What that means is your large partners are going to require, whether you're sending out purchase orders, order confirmations, things need to be standardized, and often in a way that they will dictate to you, not the other way around, just due to their size. Think about it as a large distribution client that has a bunch of retail stores. They're going to take all of your product, they'll distribute it themselves, but they need you to communicate in a way that's standardized. You'll know it. There's no like magic light bulb moment here. The customer will say, we need EDI. And what you need to do is take a look at these two partners here. We've got TrueCommerce and SPS. These are third-party softwares that specialize in EDI communications. Ultimately, you'll engage your NetSuite partner at some point, just to maybe help you with how do we format the data for the purposes of a TrueCommerce or SPS to send it to the end destination. But it's a really critical piece to get right. My only caveat here is that do understand that no two EDI integrations are alike. It's not a buzzword that captures how every single strategic customer is going to do business. We really encourage you that if you are having conversations about EDI, get a NetSuite expert involved if you're going to use NetSuite data. There's a lot of fine details that if one or two hiccups happen, then you start to not have the fun conversation about penalties and delays and things like that. You really need to give this the proper attention down to every single field and the format of the data so that you have a smooth transition with that strategic customer. Now, we've mentioned a couple third-party applications, and what we don't want to happen is we have 7 integrations and we have to go to 7 different websites to log in 7 different times to figure out what's happening with our integrations. If that's you today, take a look at Sligo. So what Sligo is it harmonizes all of your integration platforms in one dashboard. The screenshot behind shows some tiles there. Really, think about it as your one-stop shop for all of your integrations. You can manage them in lanes. You can send notifications per different area that's affected. It's a really nice software that allows you to kind of have a standardized format to how to manage and approach the integrations that are going into NetSuite. As Mark mentioned earlier, we have resources that are certified in Sligo. Sligo itself was kind of grown out of NetSuite is what they'll say. That means that a lot of what you'll see on their marketplace is compatible with NetSuite for integrations. The third point I'd like to make is they actually have turnkey integration options called integration apps. Common integrations such as Shopify to NetSuite, Amazon to NetSuite, SurveyMonkey to NetSuite, HubSpot to NetSuite. They're prepackaged solutions that are grounded in kind of natural fields, but can be customized, that are meant to be turnkey. You can go from 0 to done in 6 weeks, 8 weeks, pretty quick, even with complex high volume e-commerce. But it's not just e-commerce. If you have any curiosity about what Sligo can offer, reach out to your NetSuite partner. They can point you in the direction of the Sligo marketplace, and you can search for all of the software you may be using. And if it can connect to your NetSuite instance, whether it be through something a little more custom, like on the front, or maybe even one of those turnkey apps. Another critical part of communicating with your customers is going to be those customer-specific labels. And on the left, we have an example, right? We've got a QR code. We've got, that logo and that image in the top left, and look at the nice kind of standardized formatting of the labels there. Typically speaking, if you have specialized barcoding requirements, you've got two options. You can find an HTML resource internally or work with GVO, and we can customize labels on your behalf or help coach you through how to customize your labels. Or you can do a third party such as Bartender. Bartender allows you to do what it says here on the slide, right? Create, print, and control. A little bit of automation. Really nice tool just to help you with that piece of it. The one call out that Jamie and I would like to make here is that if you do have an HTML resource that can create a wonderful label like here on the left for you, don't be afraid to take that resource further into your NetSuite and do your advanced transaction PDFs. So when I print off an invoice or I print off a purchase order, get the branding on those too. I mean, when somebody receives a box of your goods, if they open up that kind of packing slip and that piece of paper has professional branding, that's only going to help you kind of set that tone with your customers that you mean business and that you care about those little details too. And again, reach out to your NetSuite partner. If you don't have an HTML resource and you want to take it to the next step, that's something we're happy to help with, and it can really go a long way to setting that tone of professionalism with the clients. So pivoting away a little bit from, what can we do in NetSuite, what third parties can help us, we've given you a lot to think about, and now we kind of like to take a small step back and talk about what are some strategic considerations. And, this next slide is probably Jamie and I's favorite of the presentation. It'll get your attention for sure, but we're going to talk about the fact that as we recall from the Super Bowl commercial, there are two Momoas in the world, whether or not you believe that, but there definitely are. And what we mean by that is know what you're getting. A lot of third parties will throw really, it might look like it's going to be a great fit, but when you start testing it, it may not be the perfect fit for your customized instance of NetSuite. On the flip side, something that may look rather basic or not have all the bells and whistles off the bat could deliver every single part of the functionality that you truly need. So don't always take the third parties, at face value on screenshots alone. Ask for the demo. Ask for references. Talk to your NetSuite partner. Here at GVO, we have extensive experience working with a huge variety of third parties. We're more than happy to share with you which ones have worked, what the details are in terms of your data that need to support it. And then the last point that Jamie and I will always make, it's perfectly fine if you want to take on managing the third party implementation, but you definitely have to engage with the third party to know, what are my obligations? How much work is this third party going to do to get connected to my NetSuite versus what am I expected to do? You may have to do some configuration in your account. You may have to do some saved search creation in your account. There's always benefit to understanding with your third party, what do you have to do to get it live? And also, what does their support look like after? Is it just an email? Do I have a customer success manager? These are really great questions to thoroughly vet these third parties before you make the commitment of connecting them to your NetSuite. Another key factor that we want to talk about is historical data. Throwback reference here on the left if anyone gets it, but it's a good one. We've talked about demand planning. We've talked about barcoding. We've talked about landed costs. All of these are grounded in historical data. You need to make sure that you trust your current data and that not one person kind of knows everything about your data and that's the end of the story. Having a conversation with your NetSuite partner about your current state data and making sure that your processes and the fields or the data you're communicating support taking that next step is absolutely critical. The last thing Jamie and I want to see is committing to a very expensive automation solution and then finding out that we don't have the data to support it halfway in. You really do want to take a critical step back, consider your data model, consider, does everybody know the impact on our data that this new solution or new efficiency or new process has? If you're checking all the boxes yes there, you can absolutely march forward, likely without issue, with whatever you're trying to achieve in your warehouse. But if there's a lot of ambiguity or nobody really knows how their job affects NetSuite data, there's a lot of benefit to have that education on the front end so that everybody can get on the same page and know the impact they're making in the system as part of the new process. And then lastly, the do-it-yourself mentality. We can see here with the school writing on the road, doesn't always work out, right? So this kind of echoes some of the points earlier. When you're starting to bring on these more advanced solutions for your warehouse, or even for your ERP being NetSuite for the third-party shipping or Soligo, doing it yourself is a great cost savings measure. It always is. But again, if you're not familiar with your data model, or if you don't fully understand, everything that's going to happen with this third party, it can be a quick slide to where you're going to have kind of a little bit of a mess, for lack of a better phrase. Reach out to your NetSuite partner always. If you're going to take on a hefty automation or some type of third-party integration. Why you want to do that is, what we're here to do is help think about the things that aren't on the slide or aren't in the demo. We're thinking about the details of your data model. We're thinking about your past customizations or current customizations. There's a lot that we can do in a scalable way, from just fly on the wall on the calls to maybe helping configure with a third party, or helping manage the third party. There's a lot of ways that your NetSuite partners can get involved here, just so that you don't feel like it's all on yourself to do simply from a cost savings measure. The biggest thing is always work with your partners on this. It's a big step to take. It's a way to deliver multiple efficiencies and gains for both your staff and your customers, and you should really kind of slowly step into it and don't rush a solution. And with that, I'll transition back to Jamie.
Thank you, Torm. All right, so this next slide is intended to be kind of a self-evaluation for everyone. How honest are you with your company as it relates to self-assessment? Everything that we've just outlined or at least introduced, it conceptually can be quickly done. The issue though is if you don't quite know how your company wants to operate, just adding in one of these solutions isn't necessarily going to make any of those gaps disappear magically. That's not to say that you can't use this as an opportunity to spur those conversations. I mean, I know that everyone wants to improve, and as long as you know that this is a gap, we don't know exactly how we want to do this, just make sure that you plan on a little bit of extra time to hash out those details. And specifically, if it's around an area where it might be a little bit of contentious, internally, a good consultant should be able to help guide you through that conversation. The other thing that you're going to need to have, though, is somebody on your team will have to be the person that's able to mediate and be the person that says, this is how we're doing it, this is how we're moving forward, and then hand that back over to your partner to help with that. Good example of this, I've been on a number of implementations where it may be like a private equity acquisition, and there may be 6 different companies that are coming together. So each of those companies has their own individual process. At the end of the day, are you going to have 6 custom processes for your company? Odds are not. That just doesn't make sense. It's not cost effective. So, I help guide those conversations to determine what sounds like the best practice for everyone. And then also just looking for leadership to say, yes, this is what we're doing, and this is what we want to have you incorporate into our NetSuite environment. All right, now as you go through all of this, odds are the people that are going to have to be involved and help with this are the people that you're relying on to operate your company on a day-to-day basis. So more likely than not, you may not approach all of the suggestions that Torm and I just brought up all in one fell swoop. If you do, great, power to you. But more likely than not, you'll have to kind of do it in parts. And so what I just tried to do here is, if I were in your shoes, how would I chip away at this to get to that long-term vision? And so within GVO, any of you that work with us, you'll know that we use the term stairway a lot. In this slide, I'm referring to it as phases. But the idea is that each phase builds off of the one before it. So my recommendation, if you're interested in pursuing these options, I'd start off with landed cost, cycle counting, and bins. Get those in place. Those are all kind of your master record things that you're going to need to have if you want to do subsequent phases anyway. So might as well just get it done. Might as well get it cleaned up. Once you have that in place, then you could probably be in a position where you could consider NetSuite WMS or R Smart if that was an interest of you. Same token, you could also at that point pursue ShipStation or PaceJet as an option for shipping. Once that's in place, then phase 3 is likely going to be EDI, because at that point you're probably serving a larger customer, and more likely than not, they're going to come to you with EDI requirements and specific documents, whether that's a label, whether that's in the format of an invoice. Again, we have experience in all of that. Once you get through those phases, then demand planning is probably at the point where you can start to optimize things. So the idea being that, okay, now I can really make sure that I'm taking all that tribal knowledge that 1 or 2 individuals in your company might have and putting it into a process where everyone has visibility to it, and you're putting things into a systematic process versus somebody's Jedi force that they're using to predict when you need to order things. And then lastly, barcoding comes at the end. And when I say barcoding in this regards, what I'm referring to is the automation that I mentioned earlier. So I'm scanning a barcode and I want something specific to happen. For example, I may have some automation as it relates to item fulfillment. Maybe I wanted to do something with automatically generating the invoice. Again, kind of TBD, but that's where custom development would get involved. All right, so that's the end of our presentation. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of your day to log in, listen to the 3 of us kind of banter. Really, the goal was we wanted to give you a vision of what you could do in your warehouse to improve efficiency and improve the customer experience that you're providing. We also wanted to make sure to make you aware of different options that you have. Obviously, advocating for a strong partnership, something that's a resource for you and really is looking at helping your company grow. What you can do within NetSuite to help optimize it, third-party applications that may be a good solution, and then some areas where there may be a gap between the 2 of those, and you may need to have some custom development involved. So with that, I just want to say thank you once more. And as you're going through this, as you're digesting things, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help, provide that stairway or that phased approach that you may be interested in having.
All right, yeah, and so just a couple more slides, and then we're going to jump into Q&A. And I've seen some comments. So real quick, just to bring it back up, I know you guys love hearing this, but NetSuite Simplified at goVirtualOffice.com, that's how you can reach out to us. And we do have a process for doing assessments and helping companies understand really how they're using NetSuite. And a lot of times we see companies that are not necessarily utilizing all of the modules that they currently own. And we want you to get the most out of your system and get that return on investment with NetSuite, as it is costly, right? And you want to get the most out of it. So you can always reach out to us to start an assessment. You can talk to someone for a specialized assessment, whether it's warehousing, demand planning, et cetera. We can definitely help. And then just as a reminder, Jamie brought it up, but what's next? So in October on the 7th, we're going to be doing demand planning. And Renee, one of our senior business consultants, is going to take you guys through that in a little bit more detail as to how to structure your demand planning. You know, what are some approaches to take? What does that kind of project look like? What is it structured? So a lot more detail around demand planning, how to kind of manage the fluctuations and try to get back right to a world of, you know, actual certainty, where right now we're in quite a world of uncertainty. And so with that, we're going to take a look at the questions here that are out there. And if there's not very many, or there's none, we'll end the webinar. But just to kind of start things off, I'm going to ask a question, and I've got a couple here that I'm going to ask Jamie and Torm, and then I'm going to start to look through the questions in the comments. But overall, you know, one of the things that's come up quite often in the last few years, and Jamie brought this up, is landed cost. And it's kind of that hidden cost, right, that it impacts sales margins, impacts your actual visibility towards what you're spending on an order or item basis. So the question kind of for Jamie and Torm is, you know, how long does it take to set up landed costs? What's the effort that's involved to do that?
Yeah, thank you. So really with landed costs, more often than not, you're also going to want to enable container tracking within NetSuite. And usually where this comes in is if you're ordering things from, more often than not, China, you're going to have an issue where your freight forwarder or whoever your vendor is on that side, they're going to take items off of multiple POs and they're going to put them in the container to maximize your cube. So the idea is then that I have my POs, I'm identifying now what's in that container that they told me they're shipping towards me, and now I'm going to apply landed cost against that container. So as it relates to the effort for an end user, cost you should probably assume is probably going to be about 15 to 20 hours, you know, depending on how much you guys are taking on versus us. And when I say 15 to 20 hours, that's kind of your all in. So that's configuration, that's training, a couple of test runs, that sort of thing. So it's not really too bad of a lift in my opinion.
Got it. So about 15 to 20 hours. And like Jamie mentioned, and I like to mention it too, you know, part of what we like to do is we're not here to kind of take things over for you. We want to enable you to be able to fish, right? And so part of this is, if you have a strong team that is very in-depth in NetSuite and just needs some quick training, we can just do that, or we can do the full implementation itself. So a lot of different options there. And then I guess the second question that I have, and then I'll jump to some of the comments here in the questions, is you know, any recommendations on hardware in the warehouse in terms of scanners or printers, anything of that sort?
Yep. Usually in my experience, if I'm going to go with a scanner, usually I would like to have it tethered to a hardwired computer onto the lift, or however you're picking, order picker. And what I would recommend, Motorola is already, you know, has always treated me very well. I'd recommend them just about any day of the week. The other thing to be considerate of is, as you're going through and have label printers throughout the warehouse, you're probably going to want to have them by the dock. I recommend having them in a fixed fashion. Reason being is, if they're fixed and not on a cart, you don't have a trip hazard for, you know, the extension cord running from the wall to that. And then also, again, it goes back to people being a little friendly with the equipment. You're going to also be able to put some protective bollards around them and make sure that they don't get damaged. So for printers, I always, you know, Zebra really works well in my opinion. And, you know, I'd also advocate for, if you're considering printers, I would just default and go with the thermal. You're going to have some, you know, inkjet options, but depending on the use case, you know, we're from Wisconsin, so it gets a little cold by the docks. So you want to be able to print out labels regardless of if it's middle of February versus August. So consider that.
Yeah, and I if anyone's looking for specific hardware units or anything like that, you can always reach out to us. We've got a list that works pretty well with NetSuite, and we've seen clients use successfully. So definitely message us. All right, so some of the questions were more comments, which we'll take it. So I was seeing this, Chris posted when we were going through on the shipment side, we talked about ShipStation, we talked about PaceJet as third-party options. And Chris made a great call out in the comments. He said Oslink is the best. So that is, obviously these platforms work better for different companies, and we have implemented Oslink quite a few times, and it's worked for a lot of clients. And one of the call outs that Chris mentioned in his comments was about hazmat. So if you get a little bit more advanced, if you're stepping into that hazmat world, each one of these, like I think Torm mentioned too, it's important to kind of consult with your high level requirements. If you're diving into things like hazmat, there might be one third party that's better than the other. Jamie and Torm, any comments on that overall?
No, I agree with that entirely. And that's the part where with all of this, the goal is that you're reaching out and talking through what your requirements are, because it's not intended to be a cookie cutter, like one solution fits all. There's going to be specific advantages and disadvantages to either. And so that's just a matter of, let's talk through that. Let's understand specifically what your needs are, and let's find something that works for you, versus like, yeah, you called me for this, so I'm giving you this, and that's it. That's not the intent of this.
Yeah. And I would add on that Oslink is a fantastic software. If you have, Ship Manager or WorldShip, and you want your staff to have minimal disruption to their day in and day out in that software, and you just want information to kind of not organically, but automatically come into your NetSuite, Oslink is a great fit. And we've done that, several times in just the last couple months. So it's something we're pretty familiar with. And I would agree, it can be a very strong software if you kind of have the right fit for it.
Yeah. Okay. So some people enjoyed the memes, which is great to see. So I'm going to drop down into some people are excited to move their warehouse efforts forward. That's great. Getting excited about getting that efficiency. And it's been tough. I mean, it's hard to listen to clients going through COVID. Everyone's being affected. And sometimes in these downturns, you just got to figure out how to muscle your way through it and make some of those efficiencies. So that's great to see. Let's see. So I see a question from John here. Let's see. Let me just take a quick look at it. Okay. Do you suggest or provide an on-site assessment service for warehouse layout? Now, this is one that I can kind of take a quick stab at, and then Jamie and Torm, you guys can comment on too. So one of the things that we've kind of hit on, John, is that the NetSuite is just a tool, right? So because there's so much process involved in your warehouse, it has to be considered. I'm a huge process person, so being able to be on site and walk through the warehouse, be able to see how it flows, that is incredibly important when it comes to being able to get the true requirements for what you need to have happen in NetSuite. So the answer to your question is yes. There is difficulty obviously with the time for COVID, so we have to take safety measures, but that's definitely something that we actually like to hear. I'm actually glad I saw that question, because when we don't hear that, it's kind of a disappointment. It's like, how do we validate these requirements and confirm them? So great question. Jamie, Torm, anything to add?
No, I agree with that as well. For me personally, just given my background, I really enjoy the time and ability to go through and visually see how everything is being done. I mean, there's a lot of things that, with as many implementations as I've been in now, you see a lot of best practices that each company has that are good, some of them opportunities. And it's also one of those things where you're in that environment every day. And there are times where you're going to walk by a problem just because it's become part of the background noise. You just don't know. And so there are times where just having that person who's never seen your warehouse, has some context in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, they might point out something to you that you haven't really thought about before. And that's, again, I really enjoy that. And that's just where that's where the partnership aspect comes back in again.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's no better feedback than direct feedback. And if we're on the floor seeing the process in play, or, trying to figure out, is this process going to work? We can kind of observe and get some real feedback without even having to have a conversation on, what we're planning on does it make sense? Is it actually going to be able to be taken on quickly? So I'm in full agreement. On-site's a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and I'm kind of smirking here because I'm seeing some of the other comments. The last comment we have, so there's someone who's got interest in reaching out on our Smart, and actually let me catch the name here, Lori, and makes a reference, Jamie, to you with Bradley Cooper, I think, from The Hangover, which is definitely deserved. You know, his beard is quite trim right now, so it's yeah, it's looking pretty good.
Am I Bradley Cooper the night before or the day after?
Right. Maybe winter is the day after. All right. Well, everyone, hopefully you enjoyed this. I really appreciate the commentary from the questions. And, you know, again, reach out. You can connect with all of us, all three of us on LinkedIn. You know, shoot us a message if you just got a quick question. That's fine. We'll bring you in and help you out. You'll get emails about the demand planning webinar coming up next month. You'll be able to see it on LinkedIn if you follow us, goVirtualOffice. And then if you've got any, you know, specific questions, like I said, you can either connect with us on LinkedIn or email us at that NetSuite Simplified at goVirtualOffice.com. But that's it. And again, thanks for joining. We'll talk to you in a month. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.